Hi everyone and welcome back to another tutorial. In today's tutorial, I'll show you how to configure the Remote Access VPN using Cisco Firewall Device Manager (FDM) to configure the FTDv 7.3.0 that's running on KVM in Ubuntu 22.04. Now let's take a quick look at the setup. In this setup, we will have a remote client that we're going to install a Cisco Secure Client software. Over here, we have a IP table set up as a first tier firewall. If you've seen my previous video, that's how my setup looks like. What we've added is enabling the VPN function or the remote access VPN function in the FTDv itself, right? The setup is here. You can take a look at them and to see how it's done, right? And at the end of this setup, we will have the ability to initiate a VPN session from the client to the VPN service on the FTDv and allowing us to initiate a RDP session to the Windows client behind the FTDv firewall through the VPN. Now let's hop over to the FDM, right? I have launched the FDM function over here. Now let's key in the username and password. Okay, once we log in, you should be brought to the main screen. If not, just go over to Device Manager or the device itself and click on it, and you'll be brought to this screen. Now, what we want to do is to configure the Remote Access VPN. Click on Configure, and we should be able to get in. Okay, when you first reach the screen, right, you'll see that under the connection profile, there's nothing configured here. So click on Create Connection Profile. It'll give you a graphical view of how the setup will look like. So what we're going to do is first give it a name. Okay, you can ignore the group URL. Right. There are different ways to configure the identity source. I'm only using the local identity store, so we're not going to change it, but you can use different way of authentication, even Samuel, if you're integrating with like Azure AD Samuel capability of federation, right? Now, identity store, you can create new identity stores. That's where you add new identity store for VPN. But for this tutorial, we're going to use the local identity store. Okay, you can leave the rest as it is. Now, client IP address assignment, you can use the DHCP server if you have set up a DHCP server at the DHCP scope, or you can just manually assign the IP address. So we're going to manually assign the IP address here. So click on the plus button here, and then just go over to create new network, right? So you'll be able to enter the name followed by the network or the range. I already have created a VPN pool, so I'm going to use that. Okay, and then click next. Okay, so by default you can configure the group policy, right? You can create a new group policy or use default group policy, but we're going to use the default group policy for now. Right, it'll give you a summary of what is inside the default group policy. You can see that, you know, the session settings, there are unlimited connection, idle timeouts, simultaneous login per user, which is default 3. You can change all this later, right? So I'm going to click next. Okay, next we will be configuring the global settings. By default, you can use the default internal certificate I've actually created the Let's Encrypt Wildcard certificate so that we don't get warning, but we're going to show you how it looks like if you're using the default internal certificate and go through some of the risks and inconvenience for the users if you're using the default internal certificate. For the interface, select outside. This is where the VPN will connect to, and then give it a FQDN, right? So I have set up on my DNS a FQDN to resolve to the following. For access control, there's two types, right? You can actually bypass access control using CSOP Permit VPN, which helps to reduce IP spoofing, but it takes away the ability to monitor the traffic in the VPN. So weigh your deployment needs, right, and decide whether you want to prevent IP spoofing or you want to look at a more granular control with a lot more security control capability. Okay, make sure you select net exempt, right, because that's where it will not translate the IP address when it is accessing the internal resources or when they're communicating with the internal service. So once you enable net exempt, you want to add the inside interface, which is inside for our case. You might have a lot more if you have more network, right? So add those network in. The inside network IP addresses, right? You can create a inside IP address pool that you want the VPN client to be access to. My subnet is in my demo environment is usually 172.16, so I'm going to use that, right, which is also possible. But if you have more granular setup, you might want to create a new network and assign the access to the network. Okay, once that's done, you want to basically make sure that you upload the secure client package. This allows you on the FTDM setup without turning on WebVPN to allow user to download the client, right, themselves, right? So you don't have to push down deployment. So for small setup, this is actually very useful. So I've already pre-upload the Mac and the Windows client here. I'll show you how that can be installed later in the client side of the tutorial. But do take note, if you do not have any package, you can't move forward. You need to have at least one. So recommendation, just put in all three default packages for Windows, Mac and Linux, right? So then click next. So it gives you a summary of what you have configured. Review that summary. If everything is done properly, you can look at the instruction for end user to start connecting as well. You point your browser to this, authenticate, download the packages, right, and then you can start connecting to the client itself, right? So which is a very good instruction for your end user or client user. You can give them this instruction because it will give you the link, right, to connect to as well. So once that's done, click on finish. And you see that you will have a connection profile created over here. Now you can deploy this immediately, right, to save some time. Then next thing you look at is the group policy. So make sure that you go to group policy here. We have selected the default policy for our VPN connection profile, so we can edit this, right? In production environment, you might want to create a different group policy for different sites, right? If you have more granular control. But generally, if you're not doing anything major or advanced, this is good enough. So go into the policy itself. There are a few things to do. So if you are sending out all traffic across the VPN session, which is in the case of this tutorial, you want to make sure that you have a DNS group selected so that the client can use the DNS. I'm using the default Cisco Umbrella DNS. You can set up your own custom DNS server group, right? So it's done. On the session option, you can select, how many login per user, what's the idle timeout before the connection disconnected, right? The maximum connection time, etc. Right? So if there's no connection, the VPN will auto disconnect within 30 minutes. Okay, we can leave that as default. Address assignment, if you have not done any address assignment in the connection profile, you can set it here, right? So this setup is going to override the address assignment, right? So do take note, if you configure this after the initial configuration, make sure your net and access rules are also configured. Now split tunnel is where it gets a little bit more interesting, right? So if you are doing the SASE direct internet access through umbrella, you might only want to allow the LAN traffic to come over, but in a small setup you can send all the traffic over. You can send by per split tunnel policy, which is sending all traffic over, or you can always send DNS requests over tunnel, send only specific domain over tunnel. So there's a few things you can do. I think in my blog I use this, but you can send DNS requests as per split tunnel policy because we're going to send all traffic over tunnel. So once that is done, you can check through the SSL setting, whether you want to enable datagram, DTLS, transport layer security, DTLS compression, etc. For tuning the performance. But for this tutorial, I'm going to keep it simple and keep it as default. The rest, we're not going to set up anything else, but that's all we need to do. So we should effectively edit the DNS server group. Once that's done, click on OK. Make sure to deploy the configuration. Once that deployment is done, you can actually effectively connect to the web VPN and download the Cisco secure client that is going to perform the VPN function. And you can connect to the device if you have already set up your local user. So once that's done, let's go over to the local identity source. So if you go over to object, and then come over to identity store over here, okay, you will see that there is a local identity source right here, right? So that's good enough. Next, go over to the users. You can see by default there is an admin user, and then the admin user is only used for management. So you can't use the admin user to connect to the VPN. So do take note of that. So we're going to add a new user over here. Get the name, we're going to do a demo user, create a secure password. Click OK. So you can see that, and then just as usual, deploy the setup. Right? There are major things that you need to take note. So we'll deploy as it goes, and you save out some time on the deployment. So once we've configured the demo user, we are ready to connect to the VPN itself. So now let's go over to my client machine, which I've already set up here, right? So what we're gonna do, let's just make sure I don't have VPN client installed, which is good. We're gonna go to the vpn.online, which is my VPN. So you can see that okay, so by default, if you are using the internal certificate, you always be prompted for the warning that the certificate is not secure, not trusted. So if you want to get your setup up quick and easy, right, this is probably a fast way, but not a very secure way, right? As the certificate is not trusted, you open up possibility of malicious access, especially if you're exposing it to the public internet. But this is a quick and easy way to get there, right? So we're gonna continue to trust the certificate, right? You'll see that you'll be brought to a web page, right? Key in the username, So for small setup, you can definitely use the local identity store to create that profile. But for a slightly larger setup, you might want to integrate a Radius, LDAP, or AD. Okay, once if log in, you can see that the system is detecting your CPU type, and then it's intelligent to tell enough to tell you that it is a Windows machine. So what you need to do is to download the Windows client. Okay, so it's very quick and easy for small setup. So we'll let it download, takes about 3 minutes, and then we'll come back when the download completes. Okay, the download is complete, so let's open up the client. There are other things that you can do with Cisco Secure Client, right? There's actually a lot more security function like locking down the client so that you cannot uninstall the password. You can predefine a client profile. There's a lot of things that you can do. So for more advanced requirement, larger setup, you might want to do that, but for this tutorial we're going to keep it simple. So I'm going to accept the terms and conditions, and then let's install. Right, Windows, you need to allow the client to be installed. Okay, it's done. Okay, once it's done, we have only installed the VPN only capability of the Cisco Secure Client for this tutorial. There are a lot more features that comes with the Cisco Secure Client, whether if you're using ICE, Umbrella, and even M for endpoint, or Cisco Secure Endpoint, which is the EDR piece from Cisco. So let's launch the client. Okay, you can see. So you want to key in the FTDN here, right? You can use IP address as well, not a big deal. Now, when you're first launching the session, do take note, if you go to preference, you'll see that the block connection to untrusted server, right? So when you try and connect, you will see this error, right? Untrusted server block, right? Because we're using a self-sign or internal certificate, right? You can, this is to further protect your environment. So far, for tutorial wise, we're going to uncheck this, right? And then try and connect again. You'll see that it gives you a different setup warning. It still warns you that the certificate is from an untrusted server. You can cancel operation or connect anyway. So for this, we're going to connect anyway. Now if you type in the username and password we've created, you'll see that, oops, gives you another problem, to just make sure you're aware. Now we are connected, right? So if I go into command, you can see that I have been assigned IP address 179.1.1, and then my default gateway is 1.2, right? You can specify the range, right? So if you do not want to be assigned .1, right, and then we can do a ping to the internet. You'll realize that we will not be able to get access to the internet right now because all traffic is being routed to the VPN. At the same time, right, let's just try out. Okay, it probably doesn't work. And at the same time, if we try and run a RDP desktop connection to the Windows client that we want to get access to, 162.1.1, we would not be able to access, right? So even though the connection is established, right, the VPN connection is established, we can't really access the network yet, and that's because we have not configured the net rule and the access control policy. Okay, so this is normal. We need to then go back to the FDM, and then configure our policies, right? So just go back to this policies here. Okay, first, what we want to do is to give access to for the internal network. So come over to, under policies, access control, click on add button. Okay, we're going to allow demo RA VPN to inside. Okay, from a network perspective, this is where we specify the IP address pool, right? You don't really have to specify zone. I haven't figured out which zone I should add, right? Whether it's outside or inside, but just select the network first, and then which zone you want the VPN to access to, right? So we're going to start with inside zone, then you can specify the IP address range, right? If not, you can put as any, which allows it to go to any of the network inside the site zone. Okay, we're going to keep that simple, and then click on OK. Okay, let's deploy the changes. Then let it deploy, and then we'll come back and then test out the RDP session to the internal client. Okay, deployment has completed. Now if we go back to our client machine, and if we initiate a RDP session, right, we should now be able to connect to it. Okay, so you can see we are now connected to the internal Windows client, right? It takes a bit of time to load. Right, and then you can see, right, we are connected to the internal client behind the FTDv through the VPN. So if we look at the IP address, so if we do a IP config, you will see that we are connected to 172.16.2.111. Okay, so we've accomplished the initial objective, right, which is to allow access to the RDP or the client behind the firewall through RDP. Now we'll still not be able to go to the internet, right? Okay, because we have not added the NAT and access rule for the VPN traffic to go to the internet through the FTDv, which I believe is called hairpinning, right, in the official document. So what we're going to do is now to allow the VPN client traffic that is going to the internet to be routed through the or to be forwarded through the outside interface of the FTDv. So what we're going to do is to head back to the FDM. Now if we go to, first we will need to configure the NAT rule, right? The default dynamic NAT rule, right, which is here, right? You'll see that it's dynamic. It allows IP address v4 from, I think, outside interface, right? I might have added on this earlier on, right? So if you have specified any interface IPv4 netted to the this, let's do this, right? Let's go in, take a look at this. So this is the default rule that was created. I believe that the default rule originally has inside, right? So we're going to keep that way, and then source address any IPv4 to the doing the dynamic port address translation to the outside. This is where the NAT rule happens for inside traffic to be netted to the outside interface, go to the internet. We're going to do that, right, and deploy it to make it as if it was default, right? So if you have this rule, right? Inside, outside, the RAVPN might not work, right? So what you want to do is to add a default net rule. So this is a pet rule to allow demo RAVPN to out. Okay, so source interface, we're gonna keep it blank. The source pool, right? This is where we want to specify the RAVPN, any port, and it should be netted to the outside interface, right? So that's very similar to the default rule. We just added in the source port and keep the source interface as any. Oops, sorry. Okay, you need to change this to dynamic so that it does the dynamic port address translation. Okay, once it's done, deploy that. So that's the first part, right? You want to create a net rule to allow the RAVPN IP address range to be netted using port address translation to the outside interface so that you can do the address translation before sending out to the internet. Once that's done, go to access control. So over here, you can see we've added any traffic from the RAVPN to the inside zone. You can actually add on to the rule here, right? But to keep it clear in this tutorial, we're going to create a separate rule, right? Allow RAVPN outside internet, right? So use the naming convention that you use following your company guideline, but for us, we're gonna use for the tutorial something that hopefully makes a bit more sense, right? So what you're gonna do is to allow the IP address from the RAVPN to go to the outside zone, right? So that you have a net rule, and then now you have a rule to allow the VPN to go out to the through the outside zone, right? And the net will allow it to be translated, and then you will be able to access the internet. Okay, once that is done, that's pretty much the couple of net and access rule that you need to do. Let's deploy it. It takes a short while. We'll come back when the deployment's done. Okay, it's done. So once that's done, let's hop over back to the client machine that we are initiating the VPN, right? So you can actually also come over here to look at the settings. It will tell you the statistics. You can see what's the IP address being assigned to your client. You can see that the crypto versions, etc. Right? So now you can see that I'm seeing the ping. Now if I try and access the internet now, you can see that I will be able to access the internet through the VPN tunnel, right? Because we are routing all traffic, right? And if you look at the route details, you'll see that I'm routing all traffic through the VPN itself, right? So you can take a look at all these things, right? So this is all that you need to do if you are routing all the traffic through the VPN. You can always do split tunnel, especially if you have a DNS security like Umbrella, to only route the internal traffic through the AnyConnect VPN, and then for the internet traffic, you can make use of the Umbrella DNS to provide DNS security. Now, if you have a breakout or a SIG tunnel that allows you to further protect direct internet access, you can actually do the split tunnel traffic, whereby the internet traffic gets routed directly to the internet through the Umbrella SIG tunnel, for example. Right, we'll cover that in the future video, but for this tutorial, that's all it is. And then if we go back to the RDP session, we should see that it should still be possible to access the RDP machine, right? Let's just remove the display so that we don't, right? So you can see I can still access the Windows 11 client behind the firewall itself. Okay. So you can see, right, I am still able to access this machine. Oops, something went wrong. This is a cloud server, so the connection might not be fantastic. Let's just remove down the resolution and change it to lower resolution. Okay. Yep, you can see that we are still connected to maybe next step. Yeah, we can. Okay, so you can see that there is a connection, RDP connection to my Remote VPN, Remote Access VPN client itself. Okay, so that's pretty much the essential setup to get your VPN going. Now let's take a quick look at how do we use a commercial cert, right? Or if you have a internal CA that you deploy for your Windows client machine, so that you don't get that warning, or to make it a little bit more secure, right? I'm going to show you how to let's disconnect the session. I'm going to show you how to use Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate for Remote Access VPN. You can use a normal Let's Encrypt SSL certificate as well, but I use a wildcard certificate for my lab environment, so you can see that even when I'm connecting to the Firepower web management interface, I don't get that warning. I probably will do a video to see how we can automate the renewal of the certificate. As we all know, Let's Encrypt certificate is only valid for 90 days, right? Which means that you will have to manually change the certificate every 90 days. For lab environment, it's not a big deal, but for production, you probably do not want to do that. So let's take a look at how do we enable, a commercial certificate use in your FDM, right? So let's hop back to the FDM. So from the FDM itself, let's go back to device. Okay. Before that, right, I did not explain, right? Do make sure that you have your base license enabled. For my FTDv, I have a base license available. If you are a Cisco official partner, you can raise a request for demo and lab environment to the Global Virtual Engineering to get your lab license for your testing or demo like me. Right, so you need to first have this license, base license. That without the base license, you will not be able to do or to enable the triple dash or AES encryption function, right? Because of import export control. So you need to make sure that, for me, I'm in Singapore, so that I don't have that restriction of not being able to use triple dash or AES. So very important, you need to make sure that you have the smart license, because without the smart license, the trial license doesn't allow you to test out the VPN function. So once you have that, then make sure that your Cisco Secure Client, right, is enabled you can select VPN type or premium type, right? Make sure that it's enabled. Now, if you're using FDM, you probably don't have a lot of the functions like if you're using it or if you're managing the FTDv using FMC or Cloud FMC. So do take note of that. Let's just because when you go to this session, you'll see that please select the type that you purchase to enable Remote Access VPN. You will need to purchase license or get the lab or trial license. Right? Do note that Secure Firewall Device Manager does not support any of the advanced features covered by the Advantage license. Right? So if you are using it for small setup, then you can just support VPN only. You don't need the Advantage or premium license, which is a lot more feature. But if you're using FMC or CDO or Cloud FMC, you can enable a lot of more advanced feature, which we will cover in the future. And if you look at the essential license, which is what you need, the essential license gives you the basic firewall capability, application visibility and control, and it allows you to turn on the triple dash function, right? So very important for those of you who have downloaded the 90-day trials and you are trying to do the secure VPN or Cisco Secure Client capability, you will realize that you are not able to enable that. So do take note. Okay, so once you have enabled the license, you're able to follow my configuration. Next, what I'm going to do is to go to Object for the certificates. Right, so you can see I have a Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate that I have created. Now, if you are doing this new, just go into the Add button over here, right, under Certificate. Okay, and then Add Internal Certificate. Right, you'll need to do Upload Certificate Key. You'll need to key in the name, paste the certificate, the PAM details here, and the private key detailed here. Right, so since we have done this, we're going to go in and take a look. Right, so I've given it a Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate. I have pasted in the PAM and then done the certificate key. Right, you can also select the validation usage for special service. For me, I'm using it for the SSL server, IPsec client, and the SSL client. Right, so that's what you need to do. Now, when you do that, right, you also need to input the CA server. Right, so for Let's Encrypt production server, you will need to add in the ISRG root X1 certificate as well as the Let's Encrypt root CA R3 certificate. You can actually go and search for Let's Encrypt chain of trust, and if you go in here, it will allow you to copy the PAM detail for the respective root certificate or the root CA certificate to be imported, right? So that's where you get your root CA certificate. Now, on the VP, so once you've added in the certificate and the root CA, we will need to go back to the Remote Access VPN. You can edit the setup at any time, right? The place that you need to change the certificate is over here, right? At the global settings, you can then select the Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate, right? So you will need to, when you are enabling this by default, you will need to make sure that you have the trust server enabled as well, right? So we're not going to go through that detail. Now, once you complete, you'll see that the Let's Encrypt wildcard certificate is being selected. If we click on Finish, okay, to make sure to deploy the change. While doing that, let me also show you, how we do the Let's Encrypt, right? So do take note, right? as you can see, you need to add the trust chain, especially if you are using the SSL server or the certificate for your default web management. You can see that because I've done that, when I go to the certificate, I don't get the warning, right, of it's not trusted, secure connection is trusted, certificate is valid, right? So do make sure that you have this enabled. So let's add the chain of trust. If you do not have the chain of trust, it actually will prompt you that you need to add the chain of trust. So it'll take a while for all this to complete. Oops. Okay, well, because it's deploying my other configuration, so there's a conflict. So there are some configuration that you cannot deploy while you're deploying others setting. So this is one of them. So we'll let it finish, and then since I'm already doing this previously, I'm not going to deploy this, right? So you can come here and apply full setup. Okay, let's do one thing. I want to discard. Okay, go to the detail. I can see what is the deployment difference view. Trust point. Okay, this. Okay, so I will need to deploy this before I can. So when you hit into deployment failure at some point of time, it's because some of this deployment will disrupt traffic. So in production environment, do plan for a downtime. So in a lab environment, we're going to just deploy this. You need to acknowledge that there's traffic interruption so that you don't accidentally bring down critical production upgrade, by turning off by causing disruption to your firewall. So we're going to deploy now. It should finish in a short while. We'll pause the video and come back when the deployment is done. Okay, now that the configuration is done, okay. So lesson previously in use. We can discard this deployment. Okay, should be okay. Let's hop back to the client. Okay, and then let's do a connect. Okay, you can see that the warning message does not pop up anymore because we're using a official public certificate. And let's do a connect. Okay, we should still be able to look for a website. My blog, you can always take a look at it. Usually I have a tutorial written for the video I do. It's in my link, right? So that's done, and then let's just make sure that our RDP session is still working. I've saved the user credential. Hopefully I will not be prompted to enter the credential again. Okay, you can see we are able to connect to my RDP session is connected, right? It's using another port for a new session, and you can see that it's working, right? So that's all for this tutorial. And thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for other tutorial. Next tutorial I'm going to do is to show you how to configure a site-to-site VPN between two FTDv. So stay safe and take care. Goodbye.